great place, is really is in a great place to think about hydrogen. Just today, we're hearing that Australia, for example, is looking at exporting hydrogen to Japan. There's a new investment fund in hydrogen just being established in Scotland of £1 billion. Airbus, the airline people, are looking at hydrogen for their fuel sources. And at the Munich Car Show, BMW has just released their hydrogen car. And a Scottish petrochemical plant is going over to hydrogen. So globally, hydrogen is really going to be front and center of how we're going to meet our greenhouse gas emissions. Hydrogen can be produced from both water and renewable energy, and Orillia's got both. So I think we're in a great place for that. So in Ontario, in my view, Enbridge is the leader. They've got a great demonstration project in Markham. And so I'm very happy to have Sam come and talk to us about that project and what he sees as the future of hydrogen being combined with natural gas in the province. So with that introduction, Sam, very happy to have you join us, and I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I want to say a welcome to everyone that's here, and I am very delighted to be here. We do a lot of presentation globally, and so having when I'm able to do one locally for any community within Canada, especially this close to home, it is where I am in Ontario here. I think it's fantastic. So today, what I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen, and just let me know when you're able to see it. Okay, are you able to see the screen?
No, not yet.
Share. There we go.
Yes, I can see it now.
All right, so now let's see if things work when I put it in presenter mode.
Looks good to me.
Okay, and you're seeing the proper screen, not the presenter screen, right?
It looks the proper screen, I think, yeah.
Perfect, perfect. All right, so before I get started, I usually start off by wishing everybody an interesting day that we're celebrating for the particular day. And just so everyone knows, today is National Ice Cream Cone Day. So run out and grab one when you're done. And today is also Girls' Night In Day. So for whatever it's worth to you, grab one of those and run with it. All right, you're here today to hear a little bit about hydrogen. So my name is Sam Mcdermott. I'm a technical manager working for Enbridge Gas. I've been with the company this is my 16th year. And I spent another 12 years in manufacturing before moving into the energy sector. So today, what I'm going to do is give you an overview of what we're doing in the hydrogen space at Enbridge. And then I'm going to focus a little bit more on the blending part of the project. So here goes. And look, feel free to ask some questions. It's a small audience, or if you wish, you can wait until the end and ask your questions. Either way, I am perfectly fine with it. All right, so I tried to figure out what was the best slide to put to start. And I think this one that talks about storage gives a good picture of why there's such a buzz these days about hydrogen. And what you're seeing on your screen here is you can see on the left here, it talks about the time, it's just time. And at the bottom here is the size of energy you can store, the amount of energy. And what it shows you is this. There are different ways to store energy. Flywheels, there is batteries. These are all different types of batteries in here. This is a compressed air storage, and all this is. We use fancy terms to make it sound special, but really compressed air storage, we take the air in the room and we chill it. We just really make it cold. And if you make it cold enough, it becomes a liquid. And we put that liquid in a container And then if you open that liquid to atmosphere, it heats up and it comes shooting out like a rocket, and you can use it to turn a turbine and produce power. So really, that's what it is. And then you have the same thing with water. You hear about pumped hydro. Well, all that is they take the hydro and they pump it until it's in a high reservoir. And then when they're ready to use it, they release it through a funnel, and it spins a turbine and produce electricity. And then you have hydrogen. And what hydrogen does is it allows you to store a tremendous amount of energy. So, and then methane is essentially natural gas. So why am I showing you this? Well, what I'm trying to do here is compare to you how much energy you can store in each one. So as an example, flywheels are extremely efficient. However, you can only store small amounts of energy. You're talking kilowatts, thousands of kilowatt hours of energy. And a kilowatt is just a unit of energy. It's just a way of saying energy. You see it on your utility bill. And you can only do that for store that energy. In about an hour, you'll dissipate that energy. Let's go over to batteries. So you see all these batteries being built. These, you got the Tesla batteries, you got these massive batteries being put out on large scales in Australia and places like that. Well, batteries can only store at best up to probably just a little over a day's worth of storage, and you get into the megawatt storage. So a bit bigger, but not enough for what we want. We want seasonal storage. To get into that, you're having to go higher. And you want it so that when you have that storage, you can call on it and use it whenever you like. And that's what you can do with things like natural gas, which is methane. However, because there is a pushback on fossil fuels, companies around the world like Enbridge and others are working to figure out what ways we can do to bring more sustainable products to market. And the world right now is focused on hydrogen. Now, why? Because hydrogen, you can store the energy for over seasons. And we call it seasonal storage, meaning through the 4 seasons of the year. So that's how long you can store it. You can store it for well over a year. And then you can call up that energy when you need it. And here's the good thing. Hydrogen complements things like wind and solar. So this is one of the other big drive that everybody's going out for hydrogen, because what hydrogen allows you to do with those renewables, you can now run your wind farm in the middle of the night, because currently if it runs in the middle of the night, you can store it in batteries. But at the end of the day, you can only store so much. What hydrogen allows you to do is to store it massive amounts. And how do you do that, you may ask? Well, we have a plant at our facility in Markham, and what that plant does is it takes the electricity, and you have water, and we take the water and we split it into its basic components of hydrogen and oxygen. And what we do is we keep the hydrogen. You can use the oxygen for anything else, but right now we're not using it. But the hydrogen is like electricity. You can do anything with it. Anything you can do with electricity, you can do with hydrogen, and you can do more. If you take a look at your fridge, your margarine, hydrogen, electronic production, hydrogen, steel production, almost everything you touch out there has hydrogen. And that's why hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. But it has its drawback. It's quite small. And because it's small, it can crawl through certain types of metals. It can crawl through plastics if it's not the right type, that kind of thing. It's a very small molecule. The good news is hydrogen has the highest energy density per weight of anything on the planet, with the exception of, say, you're getting into your nuclear stuff like plutoniums and all that stuff. That's all heavy duty stuff. They come with their drawbacks just like hydrogen, and they also have the good parts to them. So what hydrogen allows you to do is, this is why places like NASA uses it for rocket propellant, because it's so light, but it packs so much energy on a per weight basis. And so they can put it on their rocket ships, and it can take them to outer space. All right. I think I've set a little bit of the groundwork there. Let's take a look at the plant that we have in Markham. So this plant was originally built to support the electrical grid. And we were the first in North America to do this. And back when the Liberals were in power in Ontario, there was a call to say, okay, guys, look, we're basically giving away electricity for free to places like the US. What can we do to store electricity? And most of the people that were trying to put forth a solution came up with battery technologies. There were a few flywheels here and there. And then along came us and we said, okay, why don't we put something in different? And so we were talking to some companies in Europe and in Mississauga, very locally owned, Cummins Hydrogenics. And we said, okay, we'd like to work with you. We'd like to look further into this thing called power to gas. And it's exactly what it says. You take hydropower, run it through an electrolyzer, which you can see a piece of it here in the picture. And what this does is it, just like when you were back in school, and you remember that experiment in grade 11 or 12, so long ago, I can barely remember it, but you take a battery with 2 leads on it and you stick it in the water and the water starts to bubble. It's the exact same thing, just in a more complex scale. And what we do is, what you're doing there is just breaking the water down into its basic component, H2O, which is 2 molecules of hydrogen and 1 molecule of oxygen. We liberate the oxygen and we keep the hydrogen. And the hydrogen you can use for a ton of stuff. So here's a little bit about our plant. It's a joint venture with Hydrogenics and Cummins. We've started this since 2012. The plant's been in operation since 2018. And its main purpose was to support the electrical grid, as I said. So how do we do that? Well, the electrical grid in Ontario operates on an hourly second basis by the minute. And so every few seconds, every 2 seconds, they are adjusting the frequency. So when you buy a bulb or an appliance, it'll say 60 hertz on it. Well, they need to keep that 60 hertz right about 60 hertz. So it could go a little bit higher, maybe a quarter of a hertz higher or a quarter lower. And to do that, sometimes in the summer, your electrical utility, whether it's Electro or Toronto Hydro or Hydro One, they'll say to you, look, allow us to control your air conditioning in a conditioner in the summer. We'll turn it on and off for you, and we'll give you maybe some coupons or something. Well, what they're doing is the same thing. They're trying to balance the grid. They're trying to say, okay, let's not let that 60 hertz go too high because it could damage your appliances at home. Let's not make it go too low either. You want to keep it around 60 hertz. So, but in order to do that, you need something that can respond really fast. Batteries can do that. That's why a lot of utilities looked at batteries. Flywheels can do that. Flywheels are incredibly fast. And hydrogen, power to gas plants, this is what they can do, amongst one of the many things that they can do. Flywheel, that's probably the only thing you can do, produce energy and regulate frequency. But a power to gas plant can do that and many, many things more, which we'll get into later. So that's what we've been doing with this plant for the last few years with the IESO, balancing the electrical grid in Ontario. Now, the plant itself is 2.5 megawatts, and we've built that plant so you can expand it on the same footprint. It's only 126 square feet, and you can expand it to 5 megawatts. So you can double it. The plant produces green hydrogen because the Ontario grid is about 94 to 96% clean. And so it's clean hydrogen, green hydrogen. There's a new thing. Hydrogen has a lot of colors. You'll hear about blue hydrogen and green hydrogen, and all the differences. Green hydrogen is hydrogen produced from a very clean electrical source. You might hear the term renewable hydrogen. It's the same thing. Or blue hydrogen, which is hydrogen produced from natural gas, and then you capture the carbon. So you might hear people talk about CCUS, carbon capture and sequestration, carbon capture and storage. That's what it is. They're capturing the carbon. The issue is most of the hydrogen today is made from natural gas, and it's also made from coal. And with that, they don't capture any of the carbon. So for every ton of hydrogen you make from natural gas, you produce about 10 to 12 tons of carbon. Similarly, I mean, with the battery guys, it's the same thing. For every ton of lithium you mine for those batteries in your Tesla, you're producing about 16 tons of carbon. It's the same thing. So they all have their pros and cons. And I think it's how you manage it and what you do with it that will help us to reach that goal of keeping the temperatures in check at about 1.5 degrees by 2050. So the plant produces about 1,080 kilograms of hydrogen per day at maximum output. And on site, we can store about 170 kilograms of hydrogen, which is about 8 megawatt hours of power. That is a massive amount of power. That would be several, probably the size of a football field worth of batteries. But it's just a small tank, really the size of a tube trailer, a small tube trailer. And that goes back to the first slide I show you, where I talk about how much you can store and how dense hydrogen is in terms of the energy you can carry. The purity of the hydrogen is quite good. It's 99.99%. Why? Because we're using electrolysis. So with hydrogen, you don't produce any, when it's green produced, there is no greenhouse gases. And when you reuse it, green hydrogen or sustainably produced hydrogen, there is no greenhouse gases produced. All right, let's look at some of the use of hydrogen. Now, what you're seeing here, and now that you see this stuff, you're probably gonna see it sometimes, you'll see it popping up on your Google News or something like that. But what this slide from the Department of Energy in the US shows you is that how you can make hydrogen. So here are the sources. Fossil fuel power, nuclear power, this is your electrical distribution system. That goes into your grid. Now you put it into your electrolyzer and outcome is hydrogen. You can take that hydrogen and run it back through a fuel cell to produce power. Remember I said hydrogen, you can do almost anything you can do with electricity and more you can do with hydrogen. You can also take it and put it back into the natural gas grid to reduce carbon in the gas grid. You can also use it for heating, metals refining, ammonia, fertilizer. They already use it for all these things, upgrading oil. You can use it for vehicles. As Tim said, BMW has put theirs out. There's Toyota, there's Hyundai, there's all these guys. Hyundai just started testing their Class 8 trucks in the US this year. They're already delivering those to places like the Netherlands. And here's a good thing. The US has basically at the federal level come on board, and between them and China has basically said, look, we will be the leader in hydrogen. They're announcing bigger and bigger plans. So it's almost like this race to see who can outpace each other. And over here, this just shows you a little bit more that you can do with it. Engines, turbines, these already, GE has turbines they've been running with hydrogen for over 20 years. Fuel cells. Fuel cells is what you use in these cars and trucks. You use it for heating. You can use it, natural gas for heating, methanol production, electronics, food processing, the cosmetics industry, and the list goes on and on. Okay, let's talk a little bit about blending. So power to gas. We have a power to gas plant. And remember I said all a power to gas plant is you take the power, you put it into an electrolyzer, and we liberate the oxygen. And all an electrolyzer does is just let's call it an engine that breaks water down into its basic component of hydrogen and oxygen. So we keep the hydrogen. And if you ever have the chance to come by our facilities in Markham, you'll see the 2 tanks out back. And we can take that and we're gonna inject it into the natural gas grid, and it reduces the carbon content of the gas grid. So it's almost like getting green gas. Now, how are we doing this? Well, there was a lot of collaboration between many different groups here at Enbridge. There's also a lot of collaboration externally, like we work with the Germans, the folks from the Netherlands, the Canadian Gas Association, the American Gas Associations, many different groups around the world because we were the first in North America to do this. That plant is underway, construction, and I'll talk a little bit about that shortly, a little bit more about where we are in construction shortly. We also look at the risk, the effect. So I know when I first started talking about hydrogen at Enbridge, I know I got a lot of folks into me, Sam, have you heard of this thing called a blimp and what happened? And so I had to listen and I had to explain to them that, what happened with the blimp was not really an issue with hydrogen. It was more an issue with grounding. And my understanding from some of the material I've looked over was there was a leak in the balloon carrying the hydrogen. And when they went to put it to the ground, because it was raining, there was a short and that jumped up to the balloon, the blimp, and caused a fire. Hydrogen is very flammable. So this is also one of the drawbacks. And when it burns, it's invisible flame. So if you come to our site, you'll see we have infrared cameras to look at the flame, but hydrogen is used every day. We use it for many things. So when you drive down the road, you may see a tanker. It could be hydrogen you're driving beside. Companies like Enbridge, and other gas companies, industrial gas suppliers, this is what they do on a daily basis. We see it no different than natural gas. Natural gas is dangerous if it's in the wrong hands, if you don't know how to use it, to manage it. We have been in the business for close to 180 years. This is what we do. So I think in 180 years, we managed to learn a little bit of this. So I think we see this as a natural transition for us to get to do the hydrogen space. And this is why we're putting so much effort and research into it, along with a lot of other customers. So the next step from this was, once we did all this research, look at what's out there, did desktop studies, we said, okay, let's run some tests at our sites. Let's talk to the customers. And then we decided to talk to the first responders, the government. The mayor of Markham was very instrumental, and his team, the representative for the area at the municipal level, they visited the site. The federal government was there, the provincial government was there, and they were very, very collaborative in helping us move this along. And then we had to approach the regulatory body, which is the Ontario Energy Board. So here's what happened, and here was the outcome. So if we look at the accomplishments, we approached the board, and for any project you do that has to do with hydrocarbons, whether it's building a pipeline or putting up a transmission line for electrical, you typically will go to the Ontario Energy Board. It's a quasi-judicial body that looks after all that stuff. And so we filed with them in 2019. And then I asked the team to go back and look, because they said, I want to make sure we minimize the amount of disruption we have on the neighborhood. So we were having a longer construction time. We were going to dig up portions of Woodbine Avenue. And I said, let's go back and see if we can shorten that route. So we stopped the filing, went back, took a look at it, and realized we could do better on it. And then we refiled in 2020. And then part of what you have to do is you have to continuously engage with the community. The community needs to know what you're doing. Yes, you can go out there and build it, but to what avail? The idea is to build relationships with the community. And for myself, I've done a lot of these projects with the community, whether it's downtown Toronto for the Portland Center or wherever. It is so important to make sure that community is heard, and they ask you questions and you respond to those questions in a timely manner. We also did a lot of consultation with the First Nations, make sure that the land isn't part of the, a sacred burial site or anything like that. And we work with them to clear any of that. For us, this was on our private property, so we know it was cleared, but we still have a group that does the outreach with the First Nations. We did get OEB approval. The idea was that if we get this would be precedent setting, because no one else in North America has done this before. And if we look at the timeline over here, on November 20th, um, October 2020, we got leave to construct approval. And that's the term given to the green light from the Ontario Energy Board for you to do a project. And then we began to do the permitting and we started construction this spring. What I'm happy to tell you is that as of this Monday, we're 98% complete on construction, and we are on track to get started in early Q4 to blend hydrogen into the gas grid. And it's for a small amount of customers, 3,600 that the board has allowed us to do. And when I say board, I mean the Ontario Energy Board. And we have to report back to them in 5 years to say how it went, what we see as the benefits, et cetera, every detail. And that will be made public. So anyone, you can go on the board's website and you can look at it. Right now, you can go on and look at and pull up the filing. This is the name of the project on the Ontario Energy Board website, and this is the project number. So feel free, it's about 200 plus pages long, and you can look at it and you can fire questions at anyone on the team, including myself. We're looking to be in service, like I said, Q4 2021. Now, some of the challenges. So when you look at this here, one of the things I want to highlight is Canada released a hydrogen strategy last year. There's probably well over 30 countries now that have released hydrogen strategies. Why? Because countries are looking for ways to reduce their hydrogen, their carbon emissions. Now, what you can see here, I'll point out, it calls for 50% of the hydrogen in natural gas pipeline is to be done greater than 50%, and they're calling for dedicated hydrogen pipelines. Now, one of the things you can do with a dedicated pipeline is you can feed industrial customers. You can create fuel cell charging station. We call them charging station, but they're really stations that you gas up your vehicle, but you gas them up with hydrogen. A hydrogen fuel cell car, as an example, can be fueled in less than 5 minutes. The range is typically quite long, like the new Toyota Mirai. You can get from 800 to 1,000 kilometers in one tank of fuel, which is about 5 kilograms. A kilogram is about a gallon of gasoline. And you know, these are all the things they're looking at. And if you look at how much carbon you can abate, it's quite immense. So as I mentioned before, not all hydrogen are created equal. But because we're in a cold climate, one of the things that jumped out at me was that almost 80% of the energy used in the home for heating in Canada's cold climate. So it's important that this be dealt with. Green hydrogen, it's costly at the time, currently to make. And the reason why is because we don't have any scale at the moment. The industry is brand new. It's just starting to bootstrap, just like a computer, just starting to wake up and get going. Governments in Canada, the US, the European Union have aimed to reduce this cost. In Canada, the numbers you see here are $1.50 to $3.50 kilogram by 2050. The US is saying about $1. So it's about, if you look at the exchange rate, about 75 to 1, it's still within the ballpark. They're looking at $1 to anywhere to $2 and change in the US. And the European Union is looking at €1 as well. It's essential, very essential to educate, listen, and respond. You have to do that. You know, people, one of the reasons why the electrical, we call it pure electrics, like the Teslas and stuff like cars, and talk about cars now, have taken off so well is because, well, the infrastructure is there. The charging infrastructure is there. You can buy your car and you can plug it in anywhere you want. However, if you run a fleet of vehicles, a taxi company or something like that, you're going to be hard pressed to have your car sitting down for hours and hours charging. So if you're driving to the office, an electric car, perfect. If you're taking a trip where you can sit and wait for it to charge, it's the perfect way to go. However, if you have to be on the move constantly, then you have to look at alternatives, and hydrogen is one of those alternatives. Blending, it's proven. It's been done in jurisdictions like Germany, the Netherlands, the UK, Japan, Hawaii, Australia, and some of those, Hawaii's been doing this forever. They have what used to be called town gas. 50% hydrogen in their pipelines. But places like Japan and stuff like that, Tim mentioned Australia shipping to Japan. Well, Germany has announced $14 billion Canadian for their hydrogen strategy. Canadian government has put out several billion for theirs. And this is available to anyone, any community in Canada, First Nations, who wants to get into the hydrogen business and help create this, get this industry going. So it's available, it's there. Now, $2 billion of that 14 billion in Germany is for importation of hydrogen into Germany. They said they will be a net importer of hydrogen. And so one of the biggest importers so far potential is Saudi Arabia. Now you may say, okay, well, hang on a second, Sam. These guys are the largest oil producers on the planet. Well, yes, they are. And they're thinking ahead. They're saying, okay, well, they've built the largest solar plant on the planet, and the idea is to create green hydrogen for shipment to Europe and Asia. Canada is also looking to do something similar. And so these are the technical challenges, but all the technical challenges that are there. So for instance, hydrogen can embrittle your pipe. Remember I said how small the molecules is? When you hear them talk about hydrogen embrittlement, all they mean is that the hydrogen can, when steel expands and contract, and it does, even though it looks really hard, if you pressurize it a lot, it'll expand. And in between those little crevices in the steel, if you use a microscope and look at it, the hydrogen molecules is so small, it'll go in those cracks. And every time the pipe expand and contract, it goes further and further into that little crack. And eventually the pipe will burst or the piece of steel will collapse. And so you have to make sure the technology is there to take care of it. And thankfully, there are steel now and plastic pipe that can handle that. So as I said, it's there. It's a lot of good work for engineers and technicians and technologists and researchers to continue working on. Policies are lagging behind, but they're catching up. Codes and standards, the same thing. You know, entities like the TSSA are there. And I know when we were building our plant, we were learning from them. And at the same time, we were teaching them things about hydrogen. So it's all there. Now, here are the benefits. Hydrogen is able to decarbonize the most hard to abate sectors. So you're looking at your steel industries, heavy industrial, heavy duty vehicles. So as an example, one of the reasons why companies like Daimler and Volvo and Toyota aren't looking at batteries for their big trucks is because the battery for, say, a Class A truck is about 8,000 pounds. That's going to take forever to charge, even with the best supercharger you have. And so there's a benefit to using something like hydrogen because a fuel cell, it's not as efficient as a pure electric car. However, as I mentioned before, they have their benefits and their drawbacks. So while an electric vehicle, a pure battery and a couple of motor vehicle, pure electric, is very efficient in the 90%, a fuel cell probably around 60%. And I just read this week that in Australia, they've developed a new fuel cell, improve it, that can bring that up to about 86, close to 90%. It's still not out yet. However, that's the drawback to on the hydrogen side on where the vehicle is concerned. However, it's more than twice as efficient as your current internal combustion engines, and you can get the same payload as you will with a diesel vehicle, better range, etc. So this is from the Canadian Hydrogen Strategy, and they're looking by 2030 that the energy delivered in Canada, currently 30% of the energy delivered in Canada is by natural gas. By 2030, they see 6% of that energy being delivered by hydrogen. And by 2050, they want to flip the script and you're going to have 30% of the energy being delivered by hydrogen. You're asking what will happen to natural gas? Well, according to the federal government, they're looking that will fall to about 6 to 8% of the total energy delivered in Canada. And this is the corresponding amount of CO2 you will abate. For megatons of hydrogen that you will need by 2030, and that will abate 45 megatons of CO2e. And then by 2050, when the industry is up and running, close to 200 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent you will save putting into the atmosphere. So this is my second to last slide here, but this was just when we launched the plant. You can see, oh, here's a tank. You can see I had a professional photographer come in and took the pictures for me. But you can see it's really just the size of a small tube trailer. Just something like if you go to Canadian Tire to buy your propane, that's about the size of the tank here, just a little shorter than that and a little bit stubbier. And these were some, when we launched the plant, this is the premier tweeting out what the plant was about. So that's it. And thank you very, very much for having me today. If you have questions, I would be pleased to answer them.
Well, Sam, thank you very much for that. That was a great, great presentation. Just let me put my video on. So thank you very much. That was wonderful, and I certainly learned a lot. So we're open for questions. I do have some, but before I start, does anybody else have any questions? Please unmute your microphone so you can ask Sam directly.
Well, Tim, I have just a plethora of questions, but I'd like to start with, I suppose it's a challenge in a way. Recently, Clean Technica did a 3-part series on hydrogen and its forecasted use. And I think it was kind of a global perspective, and it doesn't paint an optimistic picture. And I simply think it's because, and I don't know if Sam is familiar with the reports, but my sense of it is that it's a Eurocentric perspective. I think it was a Brit who actually wrote the articles. My sense it's a Eurocentric perspective, and I think in Canada we need to take our own view of this because we use an enormous amount of hydrogen, and Sam's point that out, or sorry, enormous amount of energy to heat our homes, disproportionate to the rest of the world, in fact, almost. And I'm wondering if Sam is familiar with that report and its forecasts, and do you have any thoughts about how a Canadian perspective is different than perhaps a European or even a US perspective?
Yeah, certainly. So I started reading it. I did see the 3-part report, but between that and trying to finish reading the 240-page IEA report, I'm bouncing back and forth from one to the other. So yeah, so when I read those reports, I usually look at who writes them. And even if, there's another magazine that's called Recharge. And when they write stuff, it's purely about the electrics. And it doesn't matter if it's some holy grail fuel, electrics is the way to go. And so what I try to do is look for what's meaningful in those reports. And if you look at the body, the Hydrogen Council, and look at what they've put out, look at what the IEA has put out, look at what all these other more international bodies that take a more neutral approach to energy. That's where I'll go and double check these. So it's worth reading, but I always double check. And I did see when I started reading it, I'm still trying to finish the first chapter or episode. And I did get the same sense from them. However, what I took away from it is this: it is up to us to chart our own path. So the weather in Europe is not the same here. So I'll hear folks talk about heat pumps all the time, electrical heat pumps. I always say to them, okay, we have to put things in perspective. Yes, absolutely. We are going to need those electrical heat pumps, and we're going to need gas heat pumps. However, the reality is if I just replace my furnace, which is about 97% efficient, runs on natural gas, am I gonna say, okay, throw it out in year 2 or year 3 or year 4 and spend, I don't know, $12,000 or $14,000 putting in a heat pump? It's like when solar started in the early days. So the trouble with hydrogen right now is that hydrogen is trying to bootstrap from the ground up. And what I take away from that first chapter that I read in that series is that it is up to us to make that happen. If governments don't set us up to fail, and I was involved in the Canadian Hydrogen Strategy, we're also involved in the one for Ontario. If you look at what's going on in Alberta, Alberta has made it clear they're one of the, Canada is what, the 3rd or 2nd largest producer of hydrogen in the world. And Alberta has made it clear they want to have a more massive role to play in this. If you go south of the border, the trillions of dollars Mr. Biden just put out, he mentioned hydrogen is going to play a pivotal role in that. So, and if you look at the world power, China, the world power there, China, same thing, Germany, Australia, all these countries. That's where I take my cues from. But I never dismiss any of those because there's always some truth to what's in those reports. So what I took from it is pay attention, look at what needs to be done. And it's, to me, this is a message to governments. If you want the industry in Canada to succeed, we're already leaders in hydrogen, but the world is shifting to more green resources to produce your hydrogen. So all the gray hydrogen Canada produce, pretty soon it's going to be like, we don't want that anymore. What are you doing to produce more sustainable hydrogen? And I think that's where it lies. And there's a massive rush on right now to get there. China is taking the biggest lead right now, but the US is not far behind. Germany, the Netherlands, all of those countries are way further ahead.
That's great. That's great, Sam. So
yeah, if I could just respond to Sam, I'm really encouraged by your response to my question. And as you know, we in Sustainable Orillia are very bullish on hydrogen, and we want to continue our dialogue with you and others in terms of moving it forward. And I can tell you that the mayor and certainly David Campbell, I think, is on this call as well, are very interested in pursuing this in our community. So we'll be talking to you about this in the future. Thank you, Sam.
No problem.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Are there any other questions?
I see Lenore has a question.
Lenore, I don't.
If you're speaking, Lenore, you're on mute.
Lenore?
All right. Well, one of the beauty about hydrogen is that, you know, you don't need to, so with natural gas as an example, or electricity, for us to bring it to a new community, you have to have a certain, the cost has to be right to bring it there because you have to run the pipeline, the infrastructure, all that stuff. Well, if you're going to do hydrogen, just like solar, you can set up a solar farm, and that solar farm or a wind farm, as an example, you can use the, at 2 o'clock in the morning when that wind farm is still blowing, you can store that energy in the form of hydrogen, massive quantities, and you can reuse it at a later date. So I've gone to Quebec and I've worked with the Quebec government 5 years ago. I've just been informed yesterday that they've now passed it into law that hydrogen will form part of their process to decarbonize their economy. You've heard them announce the 80 megawatt plant, 88 megawatt plant there with ThyssenKrupp from Germany. That was part of the advocacy work that we did 5 years ago with the government of Quebec. And we're doing a lot of work there as well with our infrastructure there. But what hydrogen will allow you to do is remote communities, as an example. You can go there and build. You don't need to run a pipeline all the way there or even run electrical wires there or cables, because you can now set up a system there in those remote communities to produce hydrogen, and you can use it for many, many different things. You can produce electricity, you can fire your cars, you can fire boilers, generators, you name it. You can do a ton of stuff with it. That's part of the flexibility.
Oh, that's great, Sam. So a question I've just got on the project in Markham, just to remind me, the hydrogen goes into the gas pipeline for your 3,000 odd customers. So those are residential customers that are using a blended natural gas with hydrogen in their equipment that hasn't been changed out. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. So, and we've kept it to 2% to start. And why 2%, you may ask? The reason why we're starting at 2% is simply because we know that we wanted to start at a very low percentage where we didn't have to adjust any appliances, even though we know you don't have to start doing that till well after 10% by blend. So we're playing it extremely conservative to start because we want to make sure that this works. We could have gone higher because we know in the UK, they're doing up to 20% already. We know in the Netherlands, Germany, all these countries, they're doing much higher. And if you want to get really radical, look at the town of Leeds. You can see it online. It's all free for anyone to go look at. It's called the High for Heat project. And the entire town is going to be run off hydrogen. They're replacing all the appliances, 100% hydrogen. I know that's also planned for communities in North America, including Canada. So this is where the state of affairs is going. And the UK is one of the biggest leaders in hydrogen in the world right now. So, and they're very, very bullish on it.
So another question, and I'm just thinking of the context of Orillia. So the water you're using in the system is just municipal water.
Correct. It's municipal water. It doesn't matter what water you use, Tim, you're going to have to polish that water. And then you have to deionize the water. So there is some treatment that has to go into the water. So I used to work for a company called Xenon Environmental years ago, and we used to make this stuff called the DART for the Canadian military. And it's just a system where you can take it up and you can drop it into the most disease-ridden water. And in 15 minutes, you have drinkable water. We use reverse osmosis and all that stuff in there. But the technology and the secret was behind the technology they use in the filters. And that was my job, to help create all the machines to manufacture those filters. So as I mentioned in the slide deck, the technology is all there to do it. So even if it's salt water from the ocean, you can also desalinate the water to use.
That's great. Yes, so I'm just trying to I'm putting my Orillia hat on, as part of sustainable Orillia. So the way I see it, we've got, buckets of water, good fresh water. We've got a supply of green energy. We're located, fairly close to the GTA, it's an hour's drive. And we're not quite halfway between Toronto and North Bay on Highway 11, So there seems to be elements of a hydrogen project. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on how Orillia could build on the Canadian hydrogen strategy, take advantage of some of the money that you said was available, with your expertise. Just your thoughts.
Right. So what I would suggest on the fly, is subject obviously to you guys doing some homework, is that look at what industries you have. What are your strengths? What is the strengths of Orillia? Some places are heavy on manufacturing. Doesn't mean that they're the ones that have to be the only one doing it. So if you look at Bruce, for instance, Bruce has a nuclear power station. They have a lot of what we call spin in reserve, which is energy that they don't really use, but you have to keep the nuclear plant running. You can't shut it down. They take months and months to start up. They can capitalize on that and use. What do you have in Orillia that you can use? And if you don't have a lot, you can start working with your mayor to say, what can we attract to Orillia to drive this going forward? And then maybe join the Canadian Hydrogen Association, the Canadian Hydrogen Fuel Cell Association. It's a national body that advocates for hydrogen, and they're working with the NRCan, which puts out the Canadian Hydrogen Strategy, and see what can be done. There's a lot of different folks there that you can meet. I know Lambton is looking to do a hydrogen hub. There's a hub strategy, a hub group that's working. Try and get on the hubs group and see what they're talking about. What is it that you can do within your community to attract investment, that kind of thing. And then maybe that's not where you go. Maybe where you go is attracting companies that makes the stuff, that manufactures the stuff that goes into these hydrogen opportunities. So whether it's building things for pipeline, maybe it's attracting a college or a university that does research, because we're gonna need that as well. We're gonna need to train. So one of the things I'll tell folks like, Lambton College and the University of Toronto and the Ontario College of Technology in Oshawa is, we are going to need to train the workforce. We're going to need to transition people who are in oil and gas. Is that something Orillia can do? Play to your strengths is what I would say. Find out what makes you tick and play to that strength.
Oh, that's a great thing. I mean, I defer to Stan as president of Sustainable Orillia, but I would certainly like Stan to invite Sam back, and we need more discussion on this for Orillia. I don't know what you think.
Absolutely, Tim, and I thank you very much for that, your strategic view, Sam. I think that's very important to us, and we certainly will be following up with you. We met, I guess it was early this year with you and a number of others, and really appreciated your input then. And we haven't forgotten. We've just kind of backburnered it a little bit while we go through Sustainable Orillia Month, and we're so pleased to have you here speaking to us today. But we will be talking to you soon. I have a practical question, if I could. You talk about the difficulty in containing hydrogen because it's molecular size. We have an infrastructure. We have a natural gas infrastructure that's quite extraordinary. I mean, it's I don't know how long it is, and Tim probably has that number memorized in Ontario, but it's hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of kilometers. How much of that, it's at various different ages, how much of that in its current state is usable for injection of hydrogen into it, and how much of it would have to be rehabilitated to enable that? Do you have a sense of that, Sam?
Well, that's an amazing ask, and I'm glad you asked it, because right this very moment we're putting together a application to Natural Resource Canada for the Clean Fund, which is several $1 billion, and that's exactly what we want to do. We want to run a study to figure out the entire system in Ontario, which is 146,000 kilometers of pipe.
Okay.
We want to understand what pieces can take hydrogen, because they unlike, say, the UK or Europe, which was rebuilt after the war, most of their stuff is 70 to 80 years old, 100 years old. North America hasn't really experienced any bombings or anything, any world wars. So we have pipe here that is so old. I remember talking to someone when I first joined Enbridge, and he was telling me during my training course on the Z662, which is the Bible we use for pipelines. And he said, I remember we saw stuff bubbling out the ground whenever it rained, and we couldn't figure out what it is, and we kept smelling gas. And he says when they dug down, all they found was a clay opening of a pipe that used to be there.
No.
It was a bamboo pipe. That's how old it was, that they had to carry, made out of wood to carry gas. and it had rotted away, and it was slowly seeping hydrogen to the surface. So our systems in North America is quite old. Companies like Enbridge, the way Enbridge came about was by buying up all these tiny little companies that Consumer Gas used to buy up, Niagara Gas, and they all came together. The issue with that is, I mean, that's good for the corporate folks and the folks who want to, the shareholders. But for me as an engineer, when I look at it, I see opportunities and I see challenges, because what it means is we now have to figure out, can that piece of pipe that was built 60 years ago, 100 years ago, carry hydrogen? We used to have cast iron. You can't put hydrogen in cast iron, it's porous. It'll just walk right through the walls. So it's little things like that. So we don't have a system that was completely built out all at once. Different grades of steel, different vintages. You have steel that may have too much carbon. And if it has too much carbon, that might be an issue. The new steels we know can't do that. So that study we're about to undertake, that's what it's going to do. And by the way, we've already kicked off that study in Quebec for our entire franchise there. That study was kicked off back earlier in the year, and we should wrap that study up in about 8 months' time. We're also doing a study on our main trunk lines that run from British Columbia all the way down to the US East Coast. So we're going about this full steam, just like every other gas companies, and we're working with other gas companies in the US and in Canada to help them, because we were the first to go and get ours through a regulatory regime, the body. And I know I'm working with California Gas, I'm working with Fortis, ATCO in Alberta. All these different gas companies are asking us, what did you do? They're asking the same questions you're doing, Stan. And I think it's the right thing to do. So we're undertaking that study, and that's what that study going to tell us. We do know that the new areas that we've built, like, the Markhams and Stouffville and stuff like that, with plastic pipe, we know those plastic pipe can take hydrogen. We don't have an issue with those. We're more concerned with the older places like Toronto or Niagara, or communities that are much, much older, that have older pipes. We need to understand how those pipes will behave. And it's not just the pipe, it's all the valves, the fittings, appliances in people's homes, et cetera, et cetera. We need to understand. So the way we approach it, we look at individual communities, and we call them, it's like a zone. So each zone may have, I don't know, we call our zone or a network. And that's how we look at the whole gas grid. So it's networked, and we'll say, okay, look at this network. What can you tell me here? How many pieces of this network can take hydrogen? And then we can isolate that network, just like we're doing in Markham. And so that's how we would build out the system. But this big study we're planning to do will allow us to have a snapshot of the entire system. And then we can go to the Ontario board and say, okay, we need to make it hydrogen ready. So your meter set on the side of your house, we need to make sure, we're looking at smart meters. Those smart meters have to be able to carry hydrogen in the future. So these are the kind of things we're looking at.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, Sam. I'm just wondering, is there, in your current understanding of the situation, a kind of a date threshold when you have confidence, like when you started putting plastic pipes in, or when you started putting infrastructure in, is going to be able to handle hydrogen as of a certain date? Is that something you do know?
Well, what we do know is that the Canadian hydrogen strategy, we're working in harmony with that. So the goal, and we're also working on Enbridge's strategy for carbon neutrality by a certain time frame. So they want to be carbon neutral by 2050, but we'd like to do it sooner if we can. So everything is in play right now. We are looking to apply to the board to say, okay, here's what we need to do to make the system ready. The Canadian federal government has identified that the pipelines must be reused. Start to repurpose some of the pipelines for hydrogen, and we need to also look at building new pipelines. So that study that I spoke about will allow us to quantify what can take hydrogen in its current state, what needs to be upgraded, what needs to be pulled out and replaced, all of that stuff. So, and once we have that, we can get a better picture of the time frame that can be done in.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Oh, no, that's great, Sam. So can I just ask, so you mentioned Lambton wants to become a hydrogen hub. Are they looking at that kind of study for their pipeline within Lambton as part of that hub?
No, so the pipelines are owned by Enbridge. So Enbridge would have to look at all the pipelines across the entire province.
Okay, so you're looking at everything, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
so we'd look at Orillia, we'd look at every single
right.
city, municipality, jurisdiction across the province, because we own it. So we have to look at it. So this would cover the entire province from corner to corner.
Okay, and then could I just ask, the square footage of the Markham, did I hear 126 square feet, or was that
Yeah, I think it's square meters, but I
square
have to
meters?
check. I
Okay.
think it's square meters.
Because I think the footprint of that is very, very important. I mean, it's so small for the amount of energy you'll get. I mean, that's a real benefit to me, you know, from what I can see. So anyway, we'll get your slide. So if it's on the slide, I can just look it up there.
Yeah.
Thinking if we're going to do a project in Orillia, you know, it's not going to be, you know, massive areas. It can be a very, very defined area that we can do, you know.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be very big.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at what we're doing with Mississauga Transit, they want to start with 10 buses for their fleet, 10 fuel cell buses, and we'll be providing the fuel for that. It's us, New Flyer provides the bus, then there's Ballard who provide the fuel cells. So, I mean, you could probably say, okay, we'll take the lead and collaborate with Orillia Transit and surrounding transit.
Yeah.
Because you may not have enough. So this is the kind of thinking that I think you'd have to do when it comes to looking at where you want to excel.
You know, that's great.
Tim, I wonder if I could just ask Sam a question related to that last project he mentioned about the fuel cell buses. How big a plant is it that you're building there or proposing to build to supply those fuel cell buses?
We're not going to build any plant because we're going to just we had excess hydrogen from our plant in Markham.
Okay.
So we are just going to put it on tractor trailers. We have some brand new trailers now that can carry about 1,200 kilograms of hydrogen, and each bus takes about 30 kilograms, and that can run for about 300-400 kilometers before they need refilling. Get the same power output as diesel, so we'll just run it back and forth to Mississauga.
Okay, but let me rephrase it then. How, if you did build a plant, how big would it be? A couple of megawatts to do that?
You know, for what these guys are looking for 10 buses, it's going to be under 1 megawatt. It's
under. Okay,
it's
right.
It's small.
Yeah, I'm just trying to scale it. Thank you for that.
Yeah, not a problem. That plant can do about, with avoiding the global adjustment, you could probably do 30 buses a day comfortably, taking 300 kilometers. So 10 buses is 300 kilograms. The plant can produce 1,000 kilograms. So 900 kilograms. That's 10, 20, 30 buses a day, roughly. You can do.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So do I see David Campbell's wanting to have a question?
If I could, Tim, please.
Yeah.
I just noticed my background. That's funny. Thanks very much for the presentation, Sam. That was really great, very informative. So what I'm wondering is your current pilot, so the 2% blend that you got approval from the OEB to do, you said basically they gave you approval and then said, get back to us in 5 years and report. So with the climate emergency, and I'll call it that, the timeline, 5 years, like obviously you have to be cautious, you have to be safe in these trials, but 5 years seems like a long time. Are there other reasons for that?
They want to see how it affects the pipe and all of that stuff. So what we're looking to see if we can submit even earlier. Even if we can go in with interim reports, because what we want to do at the same time, David, we had done that study for close to 20,000 customers. And so we'd like to expand that within the 5-year time. We'd like to go back to the board and say, can we build out and continue as we move along? Because in Quebec, that project is 43,000 customers. And I know Alberta is looking to do the same. Fortis BC in British Columbia is looking to do the same. I know my colleagues in California, Massachusetts, New York, they're all looking to do exactly this. Alberta just announced theirs as well. They're starting at 5% blend. My counterparts in Quebec, they're starting with 15% blend. So you can see where things are going.
Well, if you were interested in a test for around 30,000, I might have a location in mind.
Oh, that'd be great. You know what? We'd like to do what they're doing in the UK, where the entire community is going to run on it, because if you go through one of their slide decks and see how immense it is, you got to get appliances, you got to get the meter sets, you got to get the piping. It's just so many things they're looking at, but they're going to be burning a fuel that will not have zero pollution.
That's right.
So this is where the state of affairs are going. And we're looking at, I have so many companies that come to me and say, look, how can we start getting rid of the natural gas we're using? Like the city of Ottawa came and say, okay, we're looking at our 40-year plan. How do we fit hydrogen into this? And, I'm being honest with them. I'm like, look, if you have return to base fleets, it works. If those fleets come in and they're sitting in your yard for the whole day, don't buy hydrogen vehicles, buy a battery like your Tesla behind you there. You got to be fair about it. Don't try and tell people something that, I'm not a sales cobbler here. I'm going to tell you straight up as it is. And I will tell people, if you're in a rush all the time and you want to drive across the country, you probably want to get maybe a gasoline vehicle or something that you're not going to sit and wait to charge for hours and hours. If you can wait and enjoy nature and the scenery, get a battery electric. It's perfect. It's perfect. So that's how I do it. And I think, Stan, when you and I met the first time, I think I tried to give you the same raw perspective. I'm not here to sell you on any one technology, because we're going to need all of them.
If I can ask one more question, Tim, please.
Yeah, carry on.
So just talking about appliances in an average home, and I'm thinking about my own home. And so with the blend, obviously, as you said, if it's kept under a certain percentage, you can use the existing ones. At a certain percentage, you'd have to look at, I suppose, replacement. So I'm thinking about all the natural gas, which are too many as I think of it. But what about a fireplace, like a natural gas fireplace? Is there such a thing? And I'm sorry for my ignorance on the topic.
No.
But is there such a thing as a hydrogen fireplace?
We tested fireplaces with hydrogen, and after about 10-12%, what starts happening is you start losing the flame color. Because remember I said when hydrogen burns, it's invisible. So what we had to do was, one of the biggest concerns the guys here in the lab have was, they kept saying to me, Sam, people aren't going to buy this if they can't see the flame. If the flame isn't blue and nice, they're not going to buy it. So it's more aesthetic for these guys. But it's not that you have to replace the appliance. You have to change the burner tip. The Wabi number becomes wonky. Now I'm getting into engineering stuff, but it's just like when you buy a propane barbecue. You can't just go and hook up a natural gas thing to it. You have to change the burner. So that's what you'd have to do. So in the UK, as an example, they already have, they call them cookers, and they have, what do they call the other one? The hot water tanks. And so they've made them now so they can take 100% hydrogen or a blend of natural gas or 100% natural gas. And it takes a technician an hour to come in and switch it over for you. We are not there yet in North America. So I wouldn't tell you to go out looking for a 100% hydrogen boiler for your home because it's not available. So, I mean, you could bring one from Europe, but it may not meet the Canadian code. So it's really, it's going to take time. So if someone comes to you and says, you know, David, I got everything ready for you to get going right now, run, because they're lying to you. It's going to take some time to strap things and get it going. And that's the issue with hydrogen. The infrastructure has to be built. Unlike the electrical guys, everything is already there. You just go home. I can plug in my Tesla at home and it'll trickle charge overnight. I might run out of patience, or I can pay to have it at a Tesla charger or a supercharger, and it'll charge it up in 20 minutes. I can get 75, 80% charge. So I think we have to have an honest conversation. We have to be honest about it. And if a technology is right for it and fit for purpose, that's the technology you should be using.
But even 20% is 20% less natural gas that we're burning. So I mean, even that is significant. Yeah.
And you're perfectly right, David. And it may not seem that significant for one customer, but all these gas utilities have millions of customers. Enbridge has 3.8 million customers. We're like the third or something largest in North America. And by volume, we're the first largest because we're in the coldest part of the world. So we use more gas than any other places in the US. So right here in Ontario. So you can see how put it in a small amount. Just to give you an idea, I calculated that with my engineering team, just by putting 0.5% in the entire 3.5 million, 8 million customers, I will save 50 tons of hydrogen, 50,000 tons per year. It's crazy. And if I do 20%, it's over 2 million tons per year that I will abate of carbon. So this is when I say to folks, okay, I know that we need the electrical heat pumps and stuff, but by the time people get rid of their furnaces and put these in, it's going to take forever. You can get a better bang for your buck right off the bat if you can say, okay, let's blend 5%, 2% in the grid. Right off the bat, boom, 3.8 million customers, you drop down the CO2, greenhouse gases. So that's part of what I'm trying to tell people. You'll never hear me out there bashing batteries, Teslas or whatever. Because we're going to need them all. And so to me, we have to approach it with that kind of open eyes.
Awesome.
I'm going to have to run soon.
Yeah, I see that. I see, Sam, you've got another appointment, you told me. So I just wanted to, it's now 2:20. You've got to go and run and pick up your daughter, I think, you know.
Tim, could I get one quick question?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Sam, do you know if there's any funding available for building a community strategy for hydrogen?
Good question. There are so many funding bodies out there. There's the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. There is the Zero Emission Transit Fund. There's probably about 14 different funding agencies that are there. Maybe reach out to NRCan to start.
Okay.
Natural Resource Canada.
Yep.
And just ask them, if they say, no, we only do this or that, say, tell me where else I can go, because there's also the National Research Council, and then there's all these different bodies. I'm not sure why the government chose to split it up into 25 different bodies. I kept saying to them, could you not put this into 1 or 2 buckets and then make it easier for Canadian industries to go to? Just navigating it, you need a full-time person.
Well, exactly,
That's
and that's
me,
my question for you. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm gonna bring this to an end, Sam. So on behalf of Sustainable Orillia, I just want to thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll be talking more in the future.
No problem. Thank you.
Have a good day. Stay safe. Okay.
You're more than welcome.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you very much.
Take